Irene had fired staff for less than this. She had the sentence half-formed already, the one that would end with "pack your things." She never got to finish it. "Get out," Irene started to say. "I don't care what excuse you—" The maid, quiet, cutting through.
He calls out for his mother sometimes. Did you know that?
She said.
In his sleep.
Did you know that?
I check on him
In
because
his
no one else
sleep?
does. And I am
Irene
not going
stopped.
anywhere tonight over— You don't know
I
anything
check
about
on
this
him
family.
because no one else does when that happens, the maid said. And I am not going anywhere tonight over a rule you only remembered because you don't like how comfortable he is with me. You don't know anything about this family. The maid's eyes did not move from Irene's face. "I know more than you think," she said.
I know more than you
Give
think.
it time.
Give it time.
6 weeks earlier, time was the one thing nobody in that house thought they needed to worry about yet. Norah walked through the front gate of the Kang estate, carrying one small bag and a name that was almost but not quite her own. She had rehearsed the interview answers on the drive over. Simple background, no family to speak of, good with children, good with quiet work, good at being forgettable. She had built entire companies from nothing, negotiated with men far more dangerous than the woman conducting her housekeeping interview, and none of that experience showed on her face as she sat with her hands folded, answering questions about references and availability. She got the position by the end of the week, assigned by a small mercy she had not engineered but would not question, to the wing of the house closest to the youngest Kang child. Eli was 7 years old, careful in the particular way children become careful when they've learned that being loud gets noticed and being noticed is not always safe. He did not warm to new staff easily. He warmed to Norah within 3 days. "You're not like the others," he told her, the first time he caught him crying quietly in the reading room and did not immediately go tell someone. "The others report things," Norah said, kneeling to his eye level. "I'm not going to report you for having a bad afternoon." He studied her for a long moment, the way children study adults when they're deciding whether to trust them. "You know what I like without asking," he said. "That's weird." "Is it?" she said carefully. "I suppose I just pay attention." That night, tucking a blanket around him without being asked to, she caught herself humming, low and almost silent, a melody that had lived somewhere in the back of her chest for 7 years without ever quite going quiet. She stopped herself halfway through and told herself it meant nothing. Eli, half asleep already, did not notice. She was not yet sure whether that was a relief. Over the following days, a quiet rhythm settled between them that neither one commented on out loud. Norah knew, without being told, that he liked his toast cut into triangles rather than squares, that he hated the sound of the estate's front gate closing at night and slept easier with his door cracked open, that he flinched very slightly every time an adult raised their voice, even in an unrelated room. "How did you know that about the gate?" he asked her one afternoon, watching her prop his door open before he'd said a word about it. Norah hesitated for half a second longer than the question should have required. "Lucky guess," she said. "Most kids don't like being sealed in." He accepted that answer the way children accept most explanations adults give them, without examining it too closely, though something in her tone made him look at her a beat longer than usual before returning to his book. The head housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. An, who had served the Kang family for over a decade, pulled Norah aside near the end of that first week. "You're good with him," Mrs. An said, not unkindly, though her eyes carried a certain measuring quality. "Better than good. Most new staff take months to earn that kind of trust from a child like Eli. You've had it in days." "I just pay attention," Norah said again, the same careful deflection she'd used with Eli himself. Mrs. An studied her a moment longer. She said, in a tone that suggested she was filing the observation away rather than accepting it outright, and said nothing further. Irene noticed things too, though not the same things. She noticed that the new maid did not flinch the way most staff did when addressed sharply. She noticed that Eli, who had spent the better part of a year being carefully, deniably managed out of the center of every family occasion, had started asking for this particular woman by name. "That is not appropriate attachment for staff to encourage," Irene said to her husband one evening, phrasing it the way she phrased everything, as concern rather than accusation. Julian looked up from the documents on his desk. "He's a lonely kid," he said. "If he's found someone who makes him feel less alone, I'm not going to discourage that." "I only mean it should be managed. Boundaries protect everyone, including her." Julian did not argue further. He rarely did when Irene framed things this carefully. She had a gift for making every restriction sound like protection, and he had spent 2 years married to her without ever quite being able to locate the seam where her concern for his son ended and something else began. What he did not know was that the same week a document had quietly moved through the family's legal office, adjusting the language of Eli's formal household status from heir apparent to ward under guardianship, filed under a routine administrative cleanup Irene herself had requested. Norah found out about the document by accident, overhearing 2 staff members discuss it in the kind of hushed, uncertain tone people use when they've noticed something wrong but don't yet have the authority to say it out loud. She said nothing in the moment. She had learned a long time ago that reacting too quickly was how you got removed from a room before you understood what was actually happening in it. That night, she sat alone in the small staff quarters assigned to her and made a single phone call, her voice dropping into a register the household had never once heard from her. "I need everything you can find on a legal filing," she said quietly. "Kang family, this week. Anything touching guardianship status. Send it to the usual account, and no one connects this back to me." The person on the other end of the line addressed her with a title no housemaid should have ever been given, and for a moment, in the dark of that small room, Norah allowed herself to simply exist as who she actually was, before folding it all carefully away again for the morning. Irene, 3 doors down, was awake too. She sat with her laptop open, running a background check she had told no one she'd initiated, staring at a set of employment records that did not connect to each other the way ordinary employment records should. Gaps, inconsistencies. A woman who had apparently existed nowhere at all for several years before appearing, fully formed, at Irene's own front gate. "Who are you?" she murmured. She closed the laptop without answers, but with a decision already forming. Whoever this woman was, she was not simply staff, and staying close to Eli the way she had did not read as accidental anymore. It read as intentional. Irene did not yet know what that intention was. She intended to find out before it became a problem she could no longer control. The following week moved with a strange, tightening pressure neither woman spoke aloud. Irene began raising the subject of boarding school at dinner, gently, repeatedly, always wrapped in language about opportunity and structure and what would genuinely be best for a boy his age. "He needs stability that this house, given everything happening in it, can't fully offer him right now," she said. "A good school abroad could give him that. Routine, peers his own age, distance from things he's too young to be carrying." Julian turned the idea over slowly, the way he turned over most decisions that touched his son, with a caution that came from not fully trusting his own judgment on this particular subject. "He's happier lately," Julian said finally, "more settled. I don't know if that's the right time to uproot him." Irene's expression did not change. "Of course," she said, "we don't have to decide tonight." But Norah, clearing plates from the next room, heard enough of that conversation to understand it was not really about happiness or timing at all. She found a quiet moment the next afternoon to raise it carefully with one of the older staff, phrasing her concern as simple curiosity rather than alarm. "Has a placement already been arranged?" she asked. "For Eli? I only ask because I heard talk of paperwork." The older woman hesitated, then answered in a lowered voice. "There's a file," she said. "I've seen it on Mrs. Kang's desk more than once. It has a start date on it already, 6 weeks from now." Her stomach tightening, Norah thanked her and walked away with her expression carefully neutral, though inside a clock she had not known was running had just started counting down. That same evening, Irene intercepted her in the east hallway, alone, no one else within earshot. "I know you're not who you told me you were," Irene said quietly. "I don't know what you are yet, but I intend to find out, and when I do, you will not be the one who decides what happens next in this house." Norah held her gaze without flinching. That was, she had learned over many years in rooms far more dangerous than this hallway, the only response threats like that ever respected. "You should be more concerned with what's actually best for that boy," she said, "than with what's best for your own position in this family. Those two things are not the same, and I think you already know that." Irene's jaw tightened, and she walked away without answering, which told Norah more than any response could have. 2 nights before that hallway confrontation, Irene had come closer to the truth than either of them yet realized. She had let herself into the small staff quarters assigned to Norah under the pretense of a routine inspection, the kind of thing a woman in her position could justify to anyone who asked. She moved through the room methodically, opening drawers, checking the seams of the single small bag Norah had arrived with, looking for anything that would explain the inconsistencies she had already found. She found almost nothing. A woman who had built an empire from nothing had also, it turned out, learned exactly how to disappear into a room without leaving fingerprints on it. Almost nothing except a folded piece of paper tucked into the lining of the bag. Half a page of handwriting, unsigned, unfinished, the kind of letter someone starts and cannot bring themselves to complete. Irene read the first line. "If you're reading this, it means I finally found a way back to you both, and I am asking you, before anything else, to understand that I never stopped." Footsteps in the hallway. Irene folded the page, shoved it back exactly where she'd found it, and slipped out of the room seconds before Norah returned from the kitchen with Eli's evening tea. Irene did not yet know who the letter was addressed to, but she understood, standing in the darkened hallway afterward, that whatever this woman was hiding reached further into this family than a simple background inconsistency ever could. She said nothing to Julian, not yet. She told herself she was still gathering proof. The truer reason, one she did not examine too closely, was that some part of her already suspected what conclusion that proof would lead to, and she was not ready to lose the ground she stood on by naming it out loud before she had a plan to survive it. It was 3 nights later that Julian found Norah sitting at the edge of Eli's bed, the boy already asleep, and heard for the first time the melody she had spent 7 years trying to keep buried. He stood frozen in the doorway. "Where did you learn that song?" he said. Norah's hands stilled in her lap. She did not turn around right away. "That's the song his mother used to sing to him," Julian said, his voice unsteady now, "before she disappeared. I never told anyone that. I don't think anyone alive knows that song except me." Norah finally turned to face him, and whatever composure had carried her through 6 weeks of careful invisibility finally, quietly gave way. "Because I'm the one who taught it to him, Julian," she said, "before I ever had to stop singing it to his face." Julian went very still, some part of him already understanding before the rest of him could catch up. Barely a whisper. "Norah?" She nodded once, tears finally falling that she had held back for 6 entire weeks. "I never left you," she said. "I never left him. Your mother made the decision before either of us had any say in it, and by the time I understood what had happened, staying gone was the only thing keeping him alive." Julian sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, careful not to wake Eli, his mind reordering 7 years of grief around a truth he had never been given the chance to question. "Explain it to me," he said quietly. "Now." She did. She told him about the Han family, about the succession war that had nearly consumed both households before Eli was even a year old, about the threat made plainly, without room for negotiation, that a Kang heir would not be permitted to exist if it meant losing the war outright. She told him that his own mother, terrified and running out of options, had made the call without asking either of them, convinced that the only way to keep the boy safe was to remove Norah entirely and let the Kang household's protection close around him in a way it never could around a young single mother trying to run. "I agreed to it," Norah said, "because I believed her and because the alternative was worse. But I made her promise you'd never know the real reason. I knew what you would have done if you found out the truth back then. You would have gone after the Hans yourself, and it would have started the exact war we were trying to avoid. You let me believe you just left. I let everyone believe that," she said, "including myself some days. It was the only story simple enough to survive scrutiny."
"Why didn't you come back once you were strong enough?" he asked. "Once you'd built everything you clearly built." "Because Han remnants were still watching this family for years afterward," she said. "Coming back too soon would have undone everything the silence had bought. I have spent every year since making sure that threat no longer exists. I only came back now because it was finally survivable, not because it was easy." From the doorway, unnoticed by either of them until he spoke, Eli's voice broke the silence, small and unsteady. "You've been here the whole time?" he said. "And you didn't tell me?" Norah turned, her heart breaking freshly at the sight of him standing there in the dark, having heard enough to understand everything and nothing all at once. "I wanted to, every single day," she said gently. "I was terrified that telling you too soon would put you in danger again. That doesn't mean it wasn't wrong that you had to grow up without me. I know it was." Eli did not run to her the way children do in the stories people tell themselves. He stood very still, love and hurt tangled together on his young face in a way that made both adults in that room understand this would take longer than one conversation to heal. "I'm glad you're not dead," he said finally, quietly, "but I'm still mad at you, both of you." That was, in its own way, the most honest sentence anyone in that house had spoken in 7 years. Irene, listening from the hallway with her hand pressed flat against the wall, understood in that moment that whatever she had been building toward had just collapsed several steps ahead of schedule. She did not wait for morning. By dawn, she had already begun making calls of her own, attempting to have Norah removed from the property before Julian could formalize anything, citing security concerns to household staff who no longer fully believed her. But the household, watching Julian sit at breakfast with his hand resting protectively over his son, no longer moved at Irene's word the way it once had. "I want everything," Julian said, quietly, when Irene finally confronted him directly. "Every document, every filing, every arrangement you made regarding my son, going back to the day I married you." Irene's composure, so carefully maintained for years, finally cracked all the way through. "I was protecting this family's future," she said. "Everything I did was defensible, reasonable. You approved every decision yourself." "I approved decisions you handed me with half the truth attached. That is not the same thing as consent." Before he could say anything further, Irene found Norah alone in the hallway outside the study, and for the first time in 6 weeks, she dropped every pretense of civility. "You think this ends well for you?" Irene said, low and sharp. "You think you walk back into this family after 7 years and everyone simply makes room?" "I don't think anything ends well tonight," Norah said evenly. "I think a boy finally gets to stop wondering why his own mother disappeared, and if that costs you your position in this house, that was never mine to protect in the first place." Irene's voice trembling with something closer to desperation than anger. "I built a life here, a place for my own son. You don't get to walk in with a folder of paperwork and undo 2 years of work in one evening." Norah's expression softened just slightly, though her voice did not. "Your son's place in this family was never actually threatened," she said quietly. "Eli existing doesn't erase him. That was a fear you built for yourself, and you decided a child should pay for it. That's the part I won't forgive, regardless of what happens to you after tonight." Irene had no answer for that. She turned and walked away down the hallway, already reaching for her phone, already trying to arrange one last move to salvage what remained of her position before the gala the following evening made whatever remained of her position impossible to hold.
It did not work. By the time the gala arrived, the household staff who had spent weeks quietly watching Irene's decisions with growing unease had already begun speaking to Julian directly, unprompted, each account small on its own and damning once placed beside the others. The gala, 3 days later, had been arranged months earlier to formally present Irene's own son as the family's clear successor, a quiet coronation dressed up as a celebration. Norah arrived not for spectacle, but with a folder of her own, the same guardianship filing Irene had quietly pushed through weeks earlier, alongside records of the boarding school placement dated 6 weeks out, alongside testimony from staff who had finally been willing to speak once they understood the ground beneath Irene's authority had shifted. She stood in front of the gathered family, Julian beside her, Eli close enough to hold his father's hand. "I'm not here to take anything that isn't already Eli's," Norah said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "I'm here because for 6 weeks, everyone in this house watched a woman make careful, reasonable-sounding decisions that all happened to move in the same direction, away from a boy whose only mistake was being born to the wrong mother at the wrong time." She laid the documents on the table in front of the assembled family, one by one. "This is not a story about a maid revealing she was wealthy," she said. "That was never the point. The point is that a child was quietly erased from his own family's future, one small decision at a time, and every single person in this house who noticed said nothing, because each individual step looked small enough to excuse." A murmur moved through the gathered relatives, the particular unsettled quiet of people realizing they had each privately noticed something over the past weeks and dismissed it as none of their business. An older uncle near the front spoke first. "The boarding school placement," he said slowly. "I was told that had been Eli's own idea." "It wasn't," Norah said. "The paperwork is dated 3 weeks before anyone claims he asked for it." Another relative, one of Irene's own cousins, looked visibly uncomfortable. "And the portrait sitting," she said quietly, more to herself than to the room. "I assumed there had been some scheduling conflict." "There wasn't," Julian said, speaking for the first time since Norah had begun. "I asked. I was told it was about optics. I believed that because I wanted an explanation that didn't require me to look harder at my own household." Irene, surrounded now by relatives who had spent the evening slowly reassembling weeks of small, dismissed observations into a pattern they could no longer ignore, had no reasonable explanation left to offer. "I only wanted my own son to be secure," she said quietly, and for the first time it sounded less like manipulation and more like an admission. "That did not make it acceptable," Julian said. "It made it worse." The consequences that followed were not staged for drama. Irene lost her standing in the household, her authority quietly and permanently dismantled, though Julian, mindful of his own son's need for a stable household rather than a public spectacle, handled the separation with more restraint than fury. Julian spent the following morning alone in his late mother's old study, sitting with a decision she had made for him without his knowledge, one he was still learning how to hold with either excusing it or letting it consume him entirely. "She thought she was saving both of us," he said later when he found Norah in the garden. "I keep trying to hate her for it, and I can't quite finish the thought. She was wrong about how she did it. I don't know if she was wrong that it worked." "It worked," Norah said quietly. "Eli is alive. You're both safe enough now that we're standing in a garden talking about this instead of planning a funeral. That doesn't make the way she did it right. Both things are true at once. I've had 7 years to learn how to hold both at the same time. You're only a day into it."
He nodded slowly, not fully comforted, but steadied enough to keep standing. That evening, once the gala had emptied and the house had gone quiet, Julian found Norah on the same terrace where, 7 years earlier, an entirely different conversation had once ended everything between them. "I don't know how to just be relieved," he said. "I keep thinking about every day I believed a version of this that wasn't true." "I know," she said quietly. "I've been carrying that same weight for 7 years. I don't think either of us gets to just set it down because the truth is finally out." "What happens now?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I know I'm not disappearing again. I know Eli needs both of us, however we figure that out. Beyond that, I think we're allowed to take this slowly for once, instead of being forced into decisions by people who were never entitled to make them for us." Eli, watching them from the terrace rather than interrupting, finally stepped out onto the terrace himself. "Are you staying?" he asked Norah, his voice smaller than it had been in the gala, more like the boy who used to cry quietly in the reading room than the one who had stood so steadily beside his father hours earlier. Norah knelt down to his level, the way she had that very first week, before any of this had a name. "I'm staying," she said, "not because anyone is making a decision for us this time, because I'm choosing it, out loud where everyone can see it." Eli did not fully soften in that moment, and neither adult expected him to. He allowed himself, instead, one small step closer, one hand slipping into hers, an honest beginning rather than a manufactured ending. Protecting someone by disappearing from them and protecting someone by staying and fighting for them are not the same kind of love, even when they come from the same fear. This family will spend a long time learning the difference, and there is no version of this story where 7 missing years simply vanish because the truth finally arrived. If you were Eli, would you have been able to forgive a mother who left to save your life, even knowing what it cost you both? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe to see how this family rebuilds what those 7 years took from them.